was Raiders linebacker Vontaze Burfict being suspended without pay for the remainder of the 2019 season for his helmet-to-helmet hit on Colts tight end Jack Doyle on Sunday. You're looking at it right now on your screen. Frank Reich reacting to the unprecedented suspension.
When someone, does something like that and attacks one of your players that that's just not supposed to be in the game. And then when it's against one of your players, you naturally have a reaction. I'm just glad they did what they did at the game, and the follow-up action seems very appropriate.
Another year, another suspension, because in the 2015 wildcard game against the Steelers, Burfict had a shoulder-to-head hit on Antonio Brown. He was suspended 3 games for that, for violations of player safety rules. And you go to 2017 preseason game against the Chiefs. His hit on Anthony Sherman resulted in a 5-game suspension, which was reduced to 3 for repeated violations of player safety rules. And then, of course, Burfict suspended for the remainder of this season for his helmet-to-helmet hit on Jack Doyle. The suspension is the longest in NFL history for an on-field infraction. Joined now by Mike Tannenbaum and Dan Graziano. How did we get here, Dan, to this unprecedented suspension?
Well, you just went through it. I mean, it's repeated offenses. This is a player the NFL has talked to in the past, has suspended in the past, has fined in the past, has brought to New York for a meeting with the commissioner and disciplinary officers where they have sat and reviewed tape. Here's what you're doing. Here's why it's wrong. Here's how to do it right. The league is at its wit's end with this player, and obviously a very severe suspension, unprecedented, as you mentioned. There's a thought that it might get reduced on appeal, but it'll still probably end up being a record setter, even if that happens.
And Dan, to your point, I wouldn't be surprised if they reduce the suspension on appeal, but still to a significant number of games. What the league is getting out of this, Aldo, they're sending a very strong message to the rest of the league. This behavior is unacceptable.
How are they sending a strong message, though, when you have a repeat offender and you're talking about the potential to reduce his sentence? Sending a clear message would be making sure that he sits out the entire year, no?
Well, there's grades of this, right? Like if the longest suspension for on-field behavior is currently 3 games, to go all the way to 12, I mean, that's very dramatic. And when you talk about players and the players' union and setting precedents, you don't want it to just be willy-nilly. So I think to Mike's point, the league has come down hard and said, this is how seriously we take this. If there's an appeal that reduces it to something less, it's still going to be something significant, and that should send a message to other players. Look, you talk about missing game checks. That's a lot of money. You talk about missing 5 or 6 or 8 game checks.
He's missed many.
It's not a small thing.
Right. The amount of money is $877,000 that's in the balance. So if he could recruit some of that, that'll be a win for Burfict. But hopefully he's learned the lesson, and this will be the end that we ever talk about this.
There's a lot of hopeful optimism. Hopefully the 4th time is the charm, the 5th time, the 11th time. Greedy, at some point, you got to wonder, who's going to step in?
Yeah, anyway. I think it actually is the 13th or 14th time that we've had some sort of issue of this kind with him. So I'm glad that we got to hear all of that from the insiders. I want to talk to the football players about the way players view this. This story was developing yesterday. We had a chance to talk about it here on Get Up. And Marcus, I'll start with you as a defensive player. I just want to hear what one player thinks of another player. As we're sitting and watching that video, you and I are just sitting here shaking our heads. It is blatantly dirty stuff. What does a player think of that?
It's horrible. It's disrespectful to the code of the NFL, right? The number one code in the NFL is that we play hard, we play tough, but we're not in this business to end dudes' careers or take away their livelihood. And usually I'm a big proponent and I fight for players. G, you know that all the time. But in this particular situation, Vontaze Burfict needs to be kicked out of the NFL. And I know people have said that, but this coming from me as a defensive player that is kind of bred and built on the physical, tough nature of how you're supposed to play football, but the intentional trying to, these are things that you are intentionally trying to get dudes ruined for their career. It's a difference in playing hard and these things occurring and players just going extra. We talk about that all the time in the NFL. But to go out, the one that's most egregious to me is him trying to break Cam's ankle, right? And I remember that play taking place, and I remember having a conversation with a bunch of dudes that played in the league, Burfict way out there bad for that. That's the type of conversation we were having. So it's to that point. 13 is, I think, the number.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this get thrown around in the last 24 hours. Well, he's a guy that you hate playing against, but you love having on your team. Really? Yeah. Because what happens if the Raiders are playing the Chargers, right? And one of my boys is Phillip Rivers or Austin Eckler, and Burfict takes a shot at him to his head and intentionally tries to hurt him, and he's laying on the ground, and that's my friend. I spend time with him. Jack Doyle has guys that he is lifelong friends with that are teammates of his or teammates of Vontaze Burfict's. And so if I'm a teammate of Vontaze Burfict and I now have to watch my friend lay down on the ground in an unconscious state, that's not a guy that I want on my football team. And we have to stop talking about the taking away guys' careers. How about taking away guys' ability to live their life?
He could be taking away guys' careers with the way he's hitting people. And I'll credit Dan Graziano, who said it in the meeting. His teammates, Vontaze Burfict's teammates in Oakland this year, named him a captain. He was voted a captain. So the other guys on his team obviously see things in him that they like. But at some point, someone has to do something.
He has facilitated the greatest coup of the NFL with the personality off the field. All the things I've heard out of Oakland, he's a great teammate. But when you see stuff like this, it's just so disrespectful to what we stand for as players when it comes to that particular situation. Vontaze Burfict has been breaking the code, and this is another
example. And ask yourself this: what has he done to prove that he does want to be in the NFL?
He don't. And then you walk off blowing kisses and laughing. And to me, that's like not only spitting in the face of the guys that you've done this to, but it's also spitting in the face of the league that's giving you 13 chances.
So we'll see. Graziano will be working the phones all morning long to see if there's any movement as far as the appeal is concerned. Meanwhile, Elle, what else do we have?
Yeah, before we start working the phones, Dan Graziano is going to fill us in with some news and notes from around the NFL. I want to start with Chicago. We saw Mitch Trubisky